You're in San Francisco, Matt? I'm looking at
Yes, on San Francisco Bay. The boat
Yeah.
that you see behind me is our office. So
I'm seeing some,
Yeah.
to your left, the up pier out there. Some,
Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's a little turbulent today, but not too
Is it? All right.
Just think, Matt, it's that way with people in offices.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Give it a couple minutes while people filter in and get started. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Gishard. I'm the chair of the the Walnut Creek Chamber of Commerce and Visitors Bureau Civic Affairs Forum. And today's forum is a Bay Area economic update. We're very pleased to have Matt Regan here. Matt is Senior Vice President of Public Policy for the Bay Area Council. Their responsibilities include promoting the organization's legislative and political agendas at the local, state, and federal levels, and that's right in the wheelhouse of our Civic Affairs. And Civic Affairs offers information sessions focused on matters of economic development as well as local, state, and governmental topics. So here we are. Matt, really pleased to have you. I understand you're going to offer an update discussing where we are today compared to pre-pandemic levels economically, how the Bay Area compares to California and the US, and key employment sectors and what has changed in the past 3 years. So folks, what we're going to do is, as people are still coming in, we have about 50 people signed up so far, but at any rate, we're going to have Matt make his presentation, and very, very nice. And at the end of that, we'll have Q&A. So if you have questions, put them in the chat. I have some questions already for Matt. So Matt, take it away. If you wouldn't mind, just tell us a little bit about you just to start things off.
Thank you, Matt. Very nice to be here. Thank you, Bob and Lynn, for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to talk to the Walnut Creek Chamber. I'm Matt Regan. I'm Senior Vice President of Policy at the Bay Area Council. We are an 80-year-old business employer-sponsored public policy and advocacy organization. About 350-ish of the region's largest employers are members. And we work on a broad swathe of policy issues, from climate to energy to housing, transportation, public safety, whatever our members tell us are the important issues of the day and the things that they'd like us to focus our efforts on, we do that. We have an in-house economic institute that prepared the slides that I'm going to show you today. I am not an economist, but I play one on Zoom occasionally. But we do have some very smart economists who helped me put this presentation together. It's very recent data. It was actually just prepared for our board meeting last week, so it's pretty up to date, and hopefully you'll find it helpful. Personally, I'm a almost 20-year resident of Contra Costa County. I live in Pleasant Hill with my family. Love the East Bay. I'm a Contra Costa First Five commissioner, and it's always a pleasure to work a little closer to home. As you'll probably see, I'm not in the home office today. I'm in our offices in San Francisco. The beautiful boat you see behind me is the Klamath. It's the Bay Area Council's new offices. It's a 100-year-old ferry boat that we bought a few years ago, pre-COVID, and spent a ridiculous amount of money renovating. And it's a great pleasure to work here. You might notice out the windows behind me that it does move. It is a boat, but hopefully that's not too much of a distraction. So what I will do is I'll share my screen, go through this slide deck. It should take me 25-30 minutes, and then we'll take some time for questions afterwards. As I say, I am not an economist, so don't ask too many detailed questions on math, but hopefully I'll be able to answer any that you might have. So let's start the show. Okay, so we are a transitioning economy right now. For a long, long time, we were, without competition in the global economy, the top of the heap. And things have changed since COVID. We went through a generation of an increasingly global economy, where the Bay Area really became the epicenter of that global economy, particularly for tech and biotech. We've seen a retrenching of that globalist trend in recent years. Obviously, President Trump was not a globalist, and now President Biden even has begun a broad effort to onshore chip manufacturing, for example. A lot of those jobs are coming back to the U.S., but not so many to California. I need to figure out how to move my slides. There we go. So this is, as I say, a brand new deck. It's a couple of weeks old, and I'm going to go through some major trends, where we've been, where we're going, maybe dispel some myths. Let's say it was prepared by Jeff Belisario, who runs our Economic Institute. So that I am not Jeff, I am Matt Regan. So, and hopefully give you some idea of what's true, what's fact, what's fiction, and what the future holds for your individual organizations. So we've heard a lot in the media that the Bay Area is over, that our preeminence is a thing of the past, that our lunch is being eaten by peer economies around the country, that people are fleeing the region, companies are fleeing the region. Is that true? Is it fake? Is it fake news? As in everything, there's an element of truth. There's a lot of propaganda. There are some myths. So hopefully I'll be able to give you some data to make you, give you a better understanding of what's actually happening. We're a data-driven organization. We try to leave the politics at the front door and go where the facts take us. So hopefully these facts will take you some interesting places. This is obviously Burning Man. Are we stuck in the mud? Economies have cycles, and they have temperatures, and we went through certainly a period where our economy was far outstripping our physical ability to accommodate it, and I'll get into the housing crisis towards the end. But we were definitely towards the hot end of the spectrum. We were creating jobs at a record clip. Our companies were spawning new companies and startups, and venture investment here was off the charts. And we were living with the consequences of that, primarily housing unaffordability, traffic log jams, a shortage of labor. And then that all of a sudden pretty much flipped, and we had a massive retrenching during COVID, and now we're trying to figure out, are we still too hot? Are we too cold? Have we become a little more sustainable from a long-term perspective? So as you can see, we've had pretty record employment growth here in the region. And so it's compared to pre-pandemic, we're growing quite a bit faster than our largest sort of economic peer, the New York market. But that's in large part because, you know, we had a much larger retrenching during COVID, and there's definitely some correction going on in the labor market currently. So as you can see, back to May 2020, when our employment numbers fell off a cliff, we have recovered much slower than either the United States or California. The Bay Area's recovery has been lagging the nation and the state, and there are reasons for that. Say we, as you can see, where the orange line at the bottom, we had a much steeper drop off. We lost more jobs per capita than anywhere else. Again, driven by our very, very expensive, high cost region. People left, and it's taken a lot longer for our jobs to recover. So as you can see, these numbers are layoffs in the tech sector. So we've been hearing a lot about you know, the massive layoffs in the tech sector. But what we don't always hear is that, you know, our tech sector is still larger than it was in 2022 in terms of overall jobs. So during COVID, there was a massive hiring boom in the tech sector. And so now we're in the midst of seeing that start to correct itself. Well, it's been correcting itself certainly for about a year. So the tech sector is starting to weed out a lot of those jobs that they thought they needed, and there was a certain amount of talent hoarding going on. Companies hiring people they didn't even have roles for, but we were in such a talent constrained market that companies were headhunting, particularly folks in engineering, and hoarding that talent, and they've started to shed that and get back to a more sustainable business model in the last year. So in 2023, as I say, those companies were going through our tech sector was going through a retrenchment. So we saw some loss in tech. That's at the very bottom of your screen, a 3.7% loss. We have seen recovery in leisure and hospitality, government and health. That's where we've seen the most of our job gains. So in the last year, we've had about a 62,000 job gain in the positive column. Which is good for the region again, and in sectors that had a very, very large drop off during COVID. Obviously, in leisure and hospitality and retail, we saw a huge decline, and we're starting to get those jobs back. So in terms of office job growth, we are not doing quite so well. We as a region have, perhaps because it's a keyboard economy, we've got perhaps the largest remote work eligible workforce of any peer metro in the United States. So, you know, we have seen, as you can see, San Jose, San Francisco, we have seen significant drop-offs in office-based jobs. The markets that have seen large growth, Dallas, Miami, Boston, would often be termed as our largest competitors. New York, interestingly, LA and Chicago also had large office job drop-offs as well. Again, talking about economies that have a very high remote work eligible workforce population. So how do we bounce back? Rainbows and unicorns. The fun part. What does the future hold in terms of the Bay Area's immediate and midterm economic prospects? So again, this is a chart similar to the one you saw before. This is unemployment figures for the peninsula, San Francisco and the peninsula and the South Bay, which is traditionally the hub of the tech world. Again, we have recovered slower, a little bit slower than the national and state data would show, but that said, we are still at historic low levels of unemployment. There are still, even despite the headlines that you read in your newspapers almost daily about layoffs, there is still a dearth of talent, a dearth of labor. We are, particularly in knowledge-based industries, we are still short of people to fill roles that are much needed. Now, this is where where I think we have real reasons to be concerned in our region. If you look, obviously, Contra Costa saw a significant drop off in population, an over 10,000 net out migration in 2023. San Francisco, actually, of the 9 counties, was the only one that saw a net increase in population, primarily because this is, again, a result of a massive overcorrection during COVID. There was a huge number of people that left. And we've started to see that population start to move back. You may have seen there's some stories in the media, not just in the last 48 hours, about people maybe second guessing the decisions to move to Texas and Florida and other places, and they're starting to come back. But certainly for the East Bay, you're looking at a loss of 18,000 almost in population in 2023, which is obviously a concern. Office vacancy rates. This is, if you're in the commercial real estate world, this is something that, is not an easy fix. We're at 34% here in San Francisco, headed towards 10 million feet of vacant office space. CBRE, who helped collect the data for this presentation, they're predicting that we're going to get close to 40% before we hit bottom. So that's huge, and that's going to take an awful lot of time to work that through the system to get with that amount of vacant space to absorb that into our growing economy. Our economists are saying, it could take almost a decade for that to absorb. So we could be entering into a decade of little or no new office construction, unless, of course, we can figure out a way to make, Class B and Class C office conversion to residential pencil. Currently, in the vast majority of buildings, that doesn't work. But, if we can pass some logical laws around tax abatement and other incentives, as they've done in New York back in 2008, when they had a massive downturn in their economy and had a lot of vacant office space, they created some very, very attractive tax incentives to convert underutilized or unutilized office buildings into residential. And I think they created almost 80,000 units of housing in Manhattan alone through property tax incentives. So we're trying to do similar things here in California, but it's because of Prop 13 and other things and the challenging ways that we tax here in California. It's a much more difficult venture, but we are trying to make it attractive to absorb some of that unused office space and hopefully get back to a situation where it's attractive once again to build office. So venture capital and artificial intelligence. These are artificial intelligence certainly is the words on everyone's lips. Is this what is going to save our economy? And I would certainly say that it is. We are the global epicenter for artificial intelligence by orders of magnitude. I'll get into some of the data in a minute. But I always try to compare this current new wave of AI to just in the last decade. There's a pretty good analogous comparison to what happened with the autonomous vehicle industry. So as a region, the Bay Area doesn't really have much history in the car manufacturing. Obviously, the NUMMI plant in Fremont was a going venture for many years, and it's now the Tesla factory. But when you think of the Bay Area, you don't automatically think of auto manufacturing. But we did develop we developed a talent pool that the auto industry was desperate for, and that was around autonomous vehicles. So while we're not Detroit or the spine of the country where most of the auto manufacturing takes place in the US, pretty much every large auto manufacturer in the world had and still has a presence here in the Bay Area, where they develop their autonomous vehicle technology. So it's the cluster of talent and knowledge here that has attracted those companies. So we have Toyota, Honda, BMW, Mercedes. You run the gamut of all the major auto manufacturers from around the globe. have autonomous vehicle testing and technology development here in the Bay Area. Obviously, even at Concord Naval Weapons Station, you have an autonomous vehicle testing facility. So how does that compare to AI? Again, all of the major auto manufacturers are trending towards autonomous vehicles. Now, pretty much every industry sector, from healthcare to banking to retail to, it runs the gamut, are all developing AI applications. And they're doing it here in the Bay Area because the talent is here, the talent clusters are here. So we stand to be, just for that one auto industry sector, multiply that by 50 when you look at AI and the applications it has across all economies. So there's certainly reason to be very bullish about the future growth. And the numbers do bear out that bullishness. So all in all, 2023 was a bit of a flat or down year for VC investment in the US. We saw in 2019 there were 82 unicorns, and a unicorn is a pre-IPO company worth $1 billion or more. So we saw a significant decrease in the growth of those. But we still maintained our sort of preeminence in attracting venture capital in the Bay Area. If you see, 40% of all VC dollars were invested in a company here in the Bay Area, which is pretty phenomenal when you look at, we're only a population of 8.5 or so million people. And, if you look at us, if the 9 counties of the Bay Area were a state, our gross domestic income, or GDP, or gross domestic product, would be larger than 45 other states. So we're a phenomenal revenue generator, a phenomenal economic engine. And, again, despite what you read about the end of our region and the end of Silicon Valley and San Francisco and elsewhere, we're still by far and away far superior to any other market out there. And again, the VC community has been focusing very heavily on artificial intelligence. A shift away from healthcare in recent years, where a lot of the money was being invested. But if you look at the bottom point here, 22 of the 35 new unicorns in the US, again, pre-IPO companies valued at $1 billion or more, were artificial intelligence companies. So it is the future. It is here, and it is the largest growth potential here in our region. Again, for the doomsayers and the naysayers, for a very, very small part of the United States, you look at the dark blue dots. These are, and this slide's a little bit out of date. This is about 6 months old. Actually, it's a year old. This is March 2023. NVIDIA now is as large as Microsoft. So, we are looking at, for a small part of the world, we do have an embarrassment of riches in very productive and high net worth companies. And it's not just tech. If you look, while every company is essentially a tech company these days, if you look through the list there, you've got financial services and Visa. Apple is essentially a consumer products company. You have energy, Chevron, obviously, and San Ramon. You have Wells Fargo banking and Netflix and entertainment. So our economy is not just tech, it is pretty diverse. And then, between 2020 and 2022, we had 27 equity events or IPOs that were valued at over $10 billion. Of those 27, 18 were headquartered in the Bay Area. That's just a phenomenal statistic. Again, anyone who tells you that this region is over, that our best days are behind us, show them this slide. Not true. We still, every time, I turn on the television and I hear that Austin or Miami or Utah or, Salt Lake City, just pick a city and pick a day. They're coming to take over our preeminence in tech. I show them the data. Again, we're a data-driven organization, and no one comes even close to this region's ability to to grow talent, to create, to innovate companies, and our entrepreneurial culture here is beyond compare. Again, it's AI. Everything, all roads lead to AI, it runs. It's not just pure AI companies, as I said earlier, with Assembly AI, ChatGPT, the ones we know of. But then you have downstream from that, the hardware, NVIDIA and Intel that make the chips that operate AI, and then the next layer down in this pyramid is obviously the consumer applications. Well, the broader industrial business to business applications that are going to be just ubiquitous in our economy. And I use the comparison of autonomous vehicles. We are going to have the lion's share of how every company, every industry sector develops their AI. They will do that here in the Bay Area. Again, to dispel myths, unicorns by region. The Bay Area is, our population's a quarter of that of the New York metropolitan area, but we've developed twice as many unicorn companies. You hear that Austin is, our biggest competitor. We've developed 7 times as many unicorn companies as them since 2022. You can see the spread in the pie chart to the right. The bulk of them are in San Francisco. Apparently, there's something like 80 different AI startups in Hayes Valley alone, which is a staggering statistic. It seems that every little office has an AI startup in it, and it only takes 1% of them to hit pay dirt, and you have $1 billion company. So again, it seems everybody that walks the streets of this region has a business plan in their briefcase and a pitch to venture capital on how they're going to be the next AI unicorn. So it is cause for great optimism for our region that we are so far ahead of anywhere else. And it is, again, it's all relative to the talent cluster that we have here in the region, our public universities, our private universities that generate so many talented engineers and programmers, etc. And then that combined with the VC, the culture here of entrepreneurialism, and the wealth that exists here that fuels those startups. It's a unique situation that many have tried to emulate, but few have been successful. Now I get to what are the anchors and the drags in our economy? What are the big risks? What are the existential risks to our ability to maintain our preeminence? And I always go back to housing. Housing is the biggest check that every family has to write every month, be it a mortgage or rent. And it's no secret to anyone on this call that we have a housing shortage, we have a housing crisis. And it's by and large driven by the fact that housing production has fallen off a cliff. As you can see from this chart, the housing industry is cyclical. And, you can see previous cycles have got, over 300,000 units a year. These are California numbers. But, have averaged the high 250s, between 250 and 300,000. Those are the previous cycles. And then you get to, this current cycle that we're in. Our peak, the 2018 to 2020 peak of this particular cycle barely reached the trough of previous cycles. So what went wrong? Why have we not been able to build sufficient housing units? Why have we not been able to maintain the levels of production of previous generations of previous cycles? Well, we've made it increasingly more expensive to build housing. We've piled on regulation on top of regulation. We've given those who are opposed to housing construction pretty much veto cards to play on every development. And we've essentially created a situation where in what would have been and should have been an ideal economic cycle to build housing, this last cycle, we had record low interest rates, which meant that, investors were easy to find. Capital was easy to find. It was inexpensive. Banks were shoveling money out the door. We also had a situation where there was incredibly high demand and a booming economy. People were willing to pay a lot for housing, but we had cheap money and high demand and no construction. So the problem is essentially not economic, it was political. And so, you know, we at the Bay Area Council have been fighting for a long time to take some of those straws off the camel's back. We have been succeeding, but you know, as we've been peeling back the sort of the regulatory onion, interest rates have been rising. And so while we've made it easy from a policy perspective, easier from a policy perspective, the money markets have made it far more challenging for developers to find capital to build. So we're stuck in this morass of low production, and that is a real challenge for us. And when you compare us to our peer markets, now these are housing permits per 100,000 people, and you know, just look at the far left hand, it's all California, with the exception of New York. And you look at the markets that are challenging us for our companies, that are attracting our jobs, and you know, we are still maintaining our competitive edge when it comes to the very high-end jobs, the engineers and programmers, the folks that work in R&D at a lot of these large companies. But when it gets to the production, the middle class jobs, the production and the engineering, they are leaving for lower cost markets, lower cost of living markets. And that's probably why we saw a loss of population in the East Bay, in Contra Costa and Alameda, which have traditionally been a little more affordable for working families. We've seen folks leave for other states. You know, 40,000 Californians a year leave for Texas, and they're not all called Elon Musk. The vast majority of those people who leave are families who make $50,000 a year or less. So the housing conundrum is the biggest threat to our long-term economic sustainability, and we need to solve it. Otherwise, we will continue to leak population to other states. We will continue to lose job share to other markets. And then eventually, you know, we will become a place where it's not sustainable to maintain basic services. It's restaurants can't hire staff in our region because no one can afford to live here on restaurant wages. So, you know, you'll often see in restaurants, you know, long lines and long waits for tables, and even restaurants with sections of tables fenced off. We've now entered an era where a lot of restaurants don't even open the doors for sit-down customers. It's all done by delivery because they can't find staff. So unless we solve this housing conundrum, it is going to have societal impacts beyond, you know, just the rising rents and rising home prices. It is going to eat away at the margins and eventually at the core of our economy. So that's the end of my presentation, and I will happy to take questions. I hope I didn't depress you all too much.
Well, so lots of good news and some bad news. So I think that's the way that the perspective that we should have on this. I do want to say, obviously, lots of people signed up, and the nice thing is I want to say that this is being recorded. So people look at it later over time. Some who couldn't get on this morning. We'll give a little shout out to our mayor, Luella Haskew, who signed up. And I can see our city manager, Dan Buckshire, and certainly Kevin Wilk. And they're probably particularly interested in the housing issue, because one of the questions that comes up is the state has mandated for cities, Walnut Creek being one, to put up something like 5,800 units. And the real question is, and the conundrum is, cities don't build housing.
Yeah.
And so cities, and Walnut Creek in particular, are faced with this issue, as you say, of housing affordability. But what is the incentive for builders to come in to any city and build in the situation that we have now? And it seems that nobody's ever going to meet these state requirements.
Yeah, and full disclosure and confession, we wrote the law SB 828 that increased the RENA numbers and gave cities a much larger obligation that they had before. The RENA process prior to SB 828 was really a charade and cooking up, under projecting the need and not being honest with cities as to the demand that was really in their communities for housing. So at least now we're starting, you know, from a factual basis that we know what the demand is. SB 828 is a much more scientific calculation of what the demand is, and the obligation then is pushed onto the cities to, you know, to plan for a higher number. So obviously, cities do not build housing units. That is true. Developers build them. Cities do, though, play a crucial role in welcoming developers into their community. And some cities do it way better than others. And I have to commend Walnut Creek for having, over certainly the last 20, 25 years, being one of the more welcoming cities in our region and in our state. They take their housing obligations seriously. And you only have to look at, a lot of the new apartments that have gone up and condos that have gone up in and around the BART station that have helped contribute to the revitalization of downtown Walnut Creek. Again, if you look at downtown San Francisco, which has been one of the worst actors when it comes to building new housing units, downtown San Francisco is dead. It's moribund. Businesses are closing. Downtown Walnut Creek, by comparison, is booming because there are people, there are eyes on the street, feet on the street. There are customers everywhere you look, and it's good for the city. And so the city had the foresight to develop a lot of downtown housing, and it will stand to the city's credit and to its good fortune for many, many decades. So what can the city, absent funding, absent developers lining up to build? The biggest thing that cities can do is through the process. Developers always complain that the process is too long, it's too complicated, it's too litigious. In San Francisco, again, I hate to beat up on one city, but they do deserve it. It can take 5, 6, 7 years to get a housing development approved, and that is just money burned. It's an absolute waste of money for a developer to go through that length of time trying to hold together a team of investors. Every day is a risk that you're going to get sued under CEQA. So making the process faster, more efficient, certainly more outcome certain. If you're going to get to know on day one. Fail fast is an old Silicon Valley adage, and it should be the same for developers and when they're proposing projects. Don't let the developer waste $8 million Lafayette Terraces on a 12-year process. Get to know fast. If the development's not feasible, if it's not what your community wants, get to know fast. But if you want to get to yes fast as well. You will get housing at a lower price point and more of it if you can make the process as friendly and efficient as possible. So that certainly for cities, and I know every city is resource constrained and everybody is short of planners since the demise of redevelopment, and it's hard. But if you can automate your processes, get rid of duplicative hearings and duplicative paperwork, as much as possible, make the process efficient, you will see more development.
The question is sticking on that same range of that we're discussing is housing. You mentioned the idea in San Francisco and it's happening around, we're hearing about the transfer of commercial buildings or the concept of making commercial buildings into housing. And we've heard of so many issues as to why that wouldn't work. What's your thought on that?
Well, there's two different kinds of office to residential conversion. Your high rise is very challenging. If you look at a standard, Class A, Class B high rise in San Francisco, the floor plates are not conducive to residential building. They're designed to maximize the number of cubicles you can squeeze into them. They've got all the windows around the outside, all the utilities in a central core, and these massive acres of floor plates. So, with state building code, every habitable room has to have a window. How do you squeeze these long, narrow apartments into these, large floor plates and make sure that every unit has windows? It's really difficult to do physically. You essentially have to strip the building to its core, and they've got concrete floors, and then you've got to run utilities through concrete floors. It's just cost prohibitive from a physical perspective. And then you start to get into the sort of the other sort of the permitting and the other parts of it it's in the financing. To make it even feasible, even slightly possible financially, you have to essentially abate all property tax transfer fees, probably a minimum of 20 years in property taxes ongoing. You have to fast track CEQA, you have to, do the rezoning, all at the cost of the city, because at first blush, it might look feasible and attractive, but it's a very expensive proposition for any developer to do. The only two successful projects that I know of in the last decade in San Francisco, both came in at over $850,000 a door. So it's not it's not demonstrably cheaper than new ground up construction. The old AAA building, AAA now are obviously in Contra Costa Center. Their old offices in at the bottom of Van Ness were converted to residential, and it was over $800,000 a door, and that's 10 years ago. So it's not inexpensive. The other type of conversion, which I think certainly for Walnut Creek and the East Bay as a whole, that would be more feasible is essentially, and this is not really conversion, it's taking underutilized and underused and abandoned strip malls and converting those. That's a demolished job. And densifying our urban corridors. And we have plenty of them in the East Bay. I look at Contra Costa Boulevard in my own hometown of Contra Costa, and I look at asphalt and very, very low margin economic ventures along what should be a grand boulevard in our community. Love to see more residential development along those boulevards again, and it's taking you can do ground floor retail and 2 or 3 stories on top and parking behind. But when you look at a lot of the current development that was designed in the 60s and 70s with a different era, I think we can do much better, and I think the economics are trending to a place where it's becoming feasible to do that. So certainly for more suburban communities, reimagining our strip malls and finding a way to do residential development there is definitely in the future.
Before I forget, I was going to ask about this presentation. I think people are particularly interested in your statistics in the presentation. So I'd love it if those of us who are listening could tap into that and get a copy of that presentation.
Yep. I've shared with the chamber staff, so please use it as you see fit.
Excellent. Let's talk about, you were talking about San Francisco and the 34% vacancy and perhaps going to rise. I think everyone's been hoping that it was going to start falling back. You're saying that the prediction is it may go up as high as 40%. And what are commercial people to do? So we look around Walnut Creek, and of course we have a number of older commercial buildings that are that have the same issue as San Francisco. Not quite the problem, but what do we do with those buildings? What do developers do, and how do we? What's the future for that?
This is a real challenge, and it's office, and here in San Francisco, obviously you've got the Westfield Shopping Center that's 70% vacant. You've got Macy's just announced last week that they're closing their Union Square store, so there's going to be a massive, we've got not just a Class A, Class B office vacancy crisis, but it's also now in large retail. And this is the challenge of our sort of how we emerge from the post-COVID world in a much higher remote work environment, and in an environment where we were trending towards a lot more sort of online shopping and less experiential shopping, if you will. So that's something I think we knew was coming for a while. COVID obviously was a real shock to the system as it relates to office. So how to repurpose existing office space? I think there's the easiest way, and the lowest hanging fruit. This is more true for San Francisco than Walnut Creek, because as I mentioned earlier, Walnut Creek's problems are not nearly as dire as San Francisco's. Walnut Creek has put a premium on public safety and cleanliness, and the street experience being one that's welcoming and having people live in its downtown. And that has sort of buffered and ameliorated a lot of the impacts of COVID. So you do have, it's a downtown that's more conducive to working in, and it's more welcoming. So Walnut Creek hasn't suffered the same level of sort of stubbornness to return to work as San Francisco has. So the easiest way for San Francisco to solve its particular problem is to make its downtown more welcoming, safer. That in and of itself will bring back a lot of suburban commuters into the city. Obviously, you have to make BART safe. We've been fighting with BART for the better part of 2 years to invest more in public safety, speed up the fare gate transition to prevent criminal activity on the system. So we're looking at San Francisco, the lowest hanging fruit, get people back into the offices who maybe want to, but are a little afraid or worried about the streetscape and crime statistics. So start that's the lowest hanging fruit. Start with that. You'll probably be able to, you know, get from 40 back down to 30, but then you're still going to have a generational problem of 30% office vacancy. How do you adapt those large floor plates that were designed for a very specific purpose into things that, you know, may not be particularly conducive? A certain percentage, not a high percentage, will be converted to housing. And then you're looking at what else. So experiential uses. There is a very there's an artificial intelligence experiential museum being proposed for Westfield, which I think is very exciting. I've seen the presentation that the investors have put together. That would be something that I think would be great for that particular site. But for Walnut Creek's purposes, you know, I think Walnut Creek's in a pretty good place. I'm not sure what the office vacancy rate is for the downtown office core, but I would guess it's considerably lower than San Francisco's. There may be, you know, for repurposing. Sometimes repurposing means, you know, the building has to go. If there isn't an economically viable or feasible use for, say, a Class B office building. Class A office is still doing pretty well. You know, premium buildings with prestige addresses and high-end amenities and good views are still doing pretty well in San Francisco. There still is a reasonably good demand for that type of product, but it's the lower end Class A and Class B that's a real problem. I don't know how much of that is vacant in Walnut Creek. Finding, you know, new uses for that is a challenge, and again, it may require, you know, converting and or demolition.
I see. You know, I'm going to ask you a question that's going to be a complex question. That's probably going to take up the rest of our time at 10 minutes or so. But it is about development overall here and out in our region. So we look at Bishop Ranch and that development. We certainly look at the opportunities that haven't been taken advantage of yet with the Concord Naval Weapons Station. And then, of course, the big development that everyone's read about in the farmland up in Solano County, those kinds of things that people are looking at as to how do we, you know, those seem to be successful, at least Bishop Ranch, and how that's working, and perhaps a footprint for others. So that's a big question, but I'm going to throw it right at you and let you run with it.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a big game when it comes to you know, environmentalism here in California, and we, you know, if you look at sort of the politics in Sacramento and even at the local level to a lesser degree, sort of environmental objectives are probably the biggest driver of policy right now in California. And I'm a big proponent of the belief that, you know, your greenhouse gas production is not as much a product of how you live as much it is a product of where you live. If you live in an urban walkable community with amenities and services close by, transit close by, jobs close by, your carbon footprint is going to be considerably lower than if you live in an auto-dependent subdivision in a place like Tracy or Patterson or Lathrop. And then you look at, and so these are demonstrably true facts. You know, the per capita GHG of a San Francisco resident is 9 tons. Of a California resident, it's I think 21, 22 tons. The US average is like 27 tons, something in those ranges. So living in an urban area is good for the environment. But our leaders in Sacramento who profess to be environmentalists and who have stated objectives to reduce, you know, our greenhouse gas production to 20% below 1990 levels, and to really, they haven't made the hard decisions. There's a great line in Tom Friedman's book, you know, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, that, you know, we've been having an environmental party, but we need an environmental revolution. And in revolutions, things get broken and people's feelings get hurt. And we've been having a party. We've been separating our trash and buying plug-in hybrids and putting solar on our roofs. But the really hard decisions we have not yet made, and that means densifying and changing the nature of some of our communities that are transit served and job rich. We haven't done that. The population of Berkeley in 1950 was 114,000. The population of Berkeley in 2020 was 115,000. Meanwhile, the population of California quadrupled. So we haven't made the hard decisions about building housing where it's environmentally sustainable to do. We continue to push all of our workforce housing over the hill, over the Altamont Pass into the Central Valley. That's where we've outsourced the bulk of our affordable housing construction, out of sight, out of mind. And those people drive 2 hours every day into their jobs in the Bay Area and 2 hours back in the afternoon. So it is incumbent upon us, if you believe that climate change is a challenge and perhaps the challenge of our generation, to allow more people to live to, these are not radical. We're not, I don't buy into this nonsense about the Manhattanization or the Hong Kongization of suburban California. These are subtle changes, like having apartments along Contra Costa Boulevard and a few of our sort of strip malled auto-dependent communities. Add a little density, a few 3 and 4 stories buildings here and there. People go to Paris and Barcelona on vacation and come back just gushing about how beautiful and walkable it is. And then you say, can we build that here? They say, no, can't build that here. That's awful. That's Hong Kong, Manhattan. So we can do better here. We can. I mean, if you look at Bishop Ranch and the housing development there, again, building essentially a new urban core in what had traditionally been a suburban community, housing and jobs and services and transit all together. That's a good thing. And then you look at the Naval Weapons Station, as it has sputtered along. We have, not one, but 2 BART stations there. We have the intersection of 2 major freeways. It's got close by a commuter airport. Potential at some point in the future for ferry transit. Check all the boxes. It's got all the infrastructure. It's the gateway between the Bay Area and the Central Valley and the greater Sacramento area. I mean, it should be a place where we can build essentially a brand new community. But again, the politics have been just impossible to make progress there. We've got now our 3rd development team. Hopefully this one's going to get past the starting line, and we'll see some construction there relatively shortly. So I'm very, very hopeful that the team that's currently in place can move that project along. I think the city, the staff in Concord know that they're on strike 3. They're staring down the barrel of not being able to fail a 3rd time and what the consequences of that might be. The Navy might just get sick and tired of Concord being the lead agency and look for alternatives. And then you also mentioned, Matt, California Forever's project in Solano County, a new city. It's certainly not our preferred alternative. Again, we should be able to accommodate our population growth in our urban centers. We should be able to make that happen. We haven't been able to make that happen. Our cities have been thus far not welcoming to new residents and new housing. Certainly not to the degree that our population has been growing. People love the jobs, but the necessary housing that goes along with those jobs, they don't seem to want. And again, it's a byproduct of the fiscalization of land use and Prop 13 and all of that. I know for the city staff that there are challenges in that regard, but we've got to find a way for cities not to be competing for big box stores and rather to be competing for housing developments. So when you get to Solano, again, far from ideal, certainly not the preferred alternative, but it's certainly preferable to the status quo. And the status quo is Lathrop. I mean, Lathrop's the largest single family home, the River Islands project in California ongoing right now. And, the last time I drove down Highway 99, there was a big billboard outside River Islands that said a short commute to Silicon Valley. I'm like, in whose world is it a short commute from Lathrop to San Jose? But that's what they're marketing those homes as, and the workforce they're marketing them to. And shame on us for making that happen. We're investing $2 billion to connect Berryessa, BART to downtown San Jose. but we won't build the housing to put bums on those bar seats. So it's a head scratcher. So for Solano, I certainly think, having spoken to the developers and looked at some of the early concepts, having a master planned, walkable, dense urban, they're planning to make this, the project sponsor says, we're not trying to build a modern city, we're trying to build a really old city. We're trying to build something like, you walk through in sort of Tuscany in Europe, where, narrow streets and apartments above coffee shops and retail outlets, and the parking in the fringes hidden in different structures out of view, but certainly not a city dominated, as we have done, in modern years, dominated by the need for parking. But certainly a much more walkable and sustainable community in that regard. So I'm definitely intrigued by what they're selling, and I'm reserving judgment till we see some more detailed plans. I certainly think it's a much preferable option to continuing to pave up and down the Central Valley. Nobody complains. Nobody's screaming and yelling that we're bulldozing almond orchards up and down the valley to build subdivisions. That just happens on the natural. But as soon as you propose to do something slightly better in a place like Solano, people come out of the woodwork and scream that it's suburban sprawl. But I don't hear those same people yelling about what's happening currently, ongoing every day. Say drive down I-5, and my in-laws are in LA, so I'm up and down I-5, several times a year, and every day Patterson gets 20 acres bigger and further south. And that's where our workforce is being forced to move to. So I'm optimistic that certainly our East Bay communities, our 680 corridor communities, are definitely going to see more housing. We can stem the bleeding of our population loss. I think that's critical. I want my daughter to be able to live here, and I want this to be the welcoming community it was when I moved here 20 years ago, and semi-affordable. And we need to get back to those days, and that means building more housing. So, and I don't think it's the Armageddon that people have been sold that it is. We can make our communities much nicer by adding housing, and it doesn't have to bankrupt our cities either.
Well, thanks, Matt. I'm at the end here of my role. I'm going to turn it back over to our CEO, Bob Linscheid. Thank you very much, and we're going to have you back sometime later in the year to talk about that optimism you're talking about. So
always a pleasure.
Thanks very much, Matt Regan. Your participation in leadership, Contra Costa, and presenting the business and economy we're appreciative of your engagement with us today in particular. Folks, before you sign off, 2 weeks from today, the Chamber is going to hold Future of Walnut Creek at the downtown library. It's on our website, March 26th. Thanks to PG&E, Contra Costa Association Realtors, Public Services, Downtown Walnut Creek Association, and the city for helping us put that on. It's going to be, there's limited seating, so you better sign up as soon as you can. In the meantime, we'll keep you informed on upcoming civic affairs programs. And we often do polling in association with our friends at the Bay Area Council. So when you see a poll from us, it's in partnership with them to give data, good information on return to work and other kinds of statistics that are important for good data decision making. With that, I think we're concluded. I want to thank Lynn Pauline for coordinating today's session, and thank you all for attending. And this is being recorded. It will be posted on our website. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, man. And I'm looking forward to dinner at the new Cooperage in Walnut Creek on Friday night. So
awesome.
all right.
Thank you.
Take care.